Welcome, everyone, to today's Town of Chatham Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. The date is November 17th, 2022. This meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please let us know. Pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law until March 31st, 2023, this meeting of the ZBA is being conducted via in-person and remote participation and shall afford adequate alternative means of public access via Microsoft Teams by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410. And then we have the conference ID number has to be put in. That's 368-564-827. And hit the pound sign, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue, hearing, or business item on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by the chair. To authorize this hybrid meeting, I have a roll call of all members. Please state your name and whether you're in favor or not. Buck?
James M. Upson, I'm in favor of the format.
Bill?
William Grau, in favor.
Randy Potash in favor.
Paul C. Semple in favor.
David R. Thompson in favor.
David H. Veach in favor.
And David S. Nixon, I'm also in favor. I would say that if any citizens or non-board members participating in the call via the phone only, please give us your name and the last four digits of your phone number for ID purposes. I'm not going to go through how the hearing is being, the applications are going to be dealt with today. Everyone, I think, is pretty familiar with that. So we will directly go to approval of minutes.
I will move to approve the minutes of October 27, 2022 as amended.
Dave Veach seconds.
Buck approves.
Paul?
All approves?
Dave Thompson approves.
Dave Veach approves.
And I approve. That's a unanimous decision. I should say the voting today are both Buck, Paul, myself, and the two Daves until we come to the last application, which is 22-081. In that case, the voters will be Buck, Bill, Paul, Dave, and Dave. Okay, so last time we discussed a couple of things about possibly limiting either the time that people speak or the amount of letters we have to read in relation to the length.
Dave, can I just interrupt for a minute? We had minutes from October 13th, which we were revising and need to be approved at this meeting as well. So I'll move to approve the minutes from October 13, 2022.
And Dave Veach seconds.
As amended.
And Buck approves.
Paul approves?
Dave Thompson approves.
Dave Veach approves.
Well, and I'll approve too.
Thank you.
Okay, any others? Okay, so, a couple of things were just mentioned by me as far as that, and I'll review that. Number one, that we limit folks who come to speak during the hearing who are not part of the application team to 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever number of minutes. And secondly, that, and this was Randy's idea originally, that we limit the letters to a certain number of words. And I mentioned possibly 300, which is more than Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, or it could be 500 and all that. So we need to discuss this and see if that's something we want to put into effect. And what's everybody's opinion? So let's start with Buck on both of those issues, Buck.
So was the Gettysburg Address 270 words?
272.
That's close enough for high school education. So I kind of think that nothing we do is anywhere is equal to the Gettysburg Address, so I'm kind of leaning towards 250 words. However, this is probably controversial, so I'm trying to say it in a friendly smile. Would it be crazy to even think about somehow communicating a template letter, which many of our attorneys have given to neighbors. Would it be easier, instead of them having to struggle, if they just knew that a lot of them don't know our criteria? Or, well, he's a good friend and I play golf with them and their family is wonderful. That, that's eating up words and time that aren't really addressing. So I thought maybe somebody with a sugar pen could suggest, if you have a position, yay or nay, you could either use this form or that form, sign your name and email it in. Make it as simple as possible to encourage comment from the neighbors and the public about something, as opposed to giving a blank piece of paper and say you only got 250 or 300 words. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you, Buck. Bill, your thoughts?
I would support both of the suggestions. I think limiting whatever the number of words it is, I don't know if giving people a canned letter is, the right thing to do or not, but I think anything we can do to limit the time involved, I would support. And I think 5 minutes is more than generous.
Randy?
All right, so 500 pages is about, 500 words is about one page. Sorry, 500 words I think is like one page typed. And so I'm going to stand by that. I think that's reasonable. So somebody would know it's either one page typed or 2 pages handwritten. I think people need to know, like, granularly, what can I do? Unless you want to put one of those situations on the website where you're done after X amount of words, it just won't take anymore. That would be great. The Chronicle has that for their website with editorials, I think, letters to the editor. So I would say at the most 500 words, and definitely 5 minutes is more than enough time. So.
Paul?
I would take it a different way. I don't think we should limit the number of words in letters that they send us, depending upon the issues that they're trying to deal with. I think what we ought to do is post the correspondence so that people can read it and see what's available. That makes it available to the public. It does not end up taking our time to read a lot of correspondence or long correspondence, and people can say what they need to say with whatever they want to do. We read all of the correspondence ourselves anyhow, so I would approach it from that viewpoint. I have no objection to saying we can put a 5-minute time limit, but I would leave it to the discretion of the chair as to whether or not that 5-minute time limit is appropriate under the circumstances or not. So those would be 2 suggestions that I would make. And I think also spreading out our meetings so that we're not trying to do too much in one meeting makes it easier to do. And I'm thinking that perhaps we can go back to a 4 o'clock schedule if people think that's appropriate. I was hoping that would help Megan, but I guess that's not an issue now. But that we could go to a 4 o'clock schedule and just meet more frequently. The last time we were here, we went through about four petitions, and it took us 2 hours, and we were done, which is not an unreasonable amount of time, I think.
Dave T?
I'm in agreement on the time that people can speak. I'd go with the 5 minutes. I'd even go to 4. I know 3 was discussed at one time. I would go along with that. And in terms of letters, I would go with Randy on limiting the number of words. Some of the letters we've gotten are like 3 or 4 pages, and it's like an attorney presenting something to the Supreme Court where you can't possibly digest what they're saying. just beyond belief. The idea of posting them on the website, not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Thank you.
Dave Veach.
Yeah, yes. So, yeah, I think timing the speaker is a 5-minute limit is, I think, reasonable, again, with chair's discretion. And, you know, we're not seeking to limit our comments or the comments of the presenters or anything. But sometimes, as you know, we can get some fairly lengthy comments made by members of the public. So I think controlling that makes sense. And I'm also in agreement with Paul on the posting of the letters. I was more, rather than the wording or the number of words per letter, I was more interested in you said, Dave, possibly about, taking the ability to summarize letters in our reading of them. I think that if we can post them and then at our discretion, perhaps summarize some of the more lengthy ones in terms of our comments, that could be very helpful as you know, as the certain things come up and there'll be long lists of letters and I think that would be a much better way to handle that, definitely. So those are my thoughts on those 2 points.
So those of you who think that we could post the letters, I'm not too sure, I haven't discussed that with Sarah about how easy that is or not. Are you thinking that they wouldn't be read by anybody on the board? Or are you thinking that this is a way to get the information out, but they'd still be read?
Well, I'm trying to seek a way to lessen the burden of reading the contents of every letter. I mean, most of them are, when it's a one line and it's an email or something, that's different. But, sometimes we get either numerous responses or some lengthy, and for us to go through reading them into the record, as you will, I don't know, I think it'd be nice to have some flexibility with that. But I understand also that I'm proud of the way we do, that we do listen, and we do take the time to do a lot of those things, but we're seeking a way to try to, our workload's getting greater, and we're seeking a way to try to manage that a little better. So.
Yeah, to me, the reading of the letters is very important because it emphasizes to the public that your letter is that important. It isn't just posted someplace and hope somebody reads it, that we read it and that the applicant hears it. Now, it doesn't mean they're listening, but at least they hear it. And that it makes a statement that everybody is important and we want to hear what you have to say.
What about the ability to paraphrase or?
Well, I think that's important, that, let's say we pick 300 or 5, whatever it is.
So they
But
say-
yes,
right, yeah.
I think that's very important that whoever is reading the letters that day in advance must review them and say, okay, well, this is what they meant to say. And, so-and-so and so on, and go like that. It's just a responsibility that comes with a job, so to speak. So let's circle back to the timing. Is 5 minutes reasonable to everybody or no?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'll support David's thought on 4 minutes.
All right.
I think it seems to me we're accustomed to town meeting where it's 5 minutes. I don't know that we're going to gain that much by knocking a minute off of that in terms of our criteria.
No, and it has to be enforced, Ed. I like the idea that whoever is running the meeting can say, well, okay, we can listen to you another 2 minutes, or that's it for you, see you later. You know, I mean, I discussed with the gentleman, our executive producer and our producer, that we can shut the mic off. We can ring a bell in their ear. And there's all kinds of ways to get the message across that 5 minutes is here, it's come and gone, stop, you know? Oh, there's Mr. Riley. No, we're not talking about you, Mr. Riley. So,
I think my suggestion on paraphrasing is that they're always the concern that from the writer's viewpoint, you're deleting from the letter what was significant or not significant. And if you post it, everybody gets to see it. So that it's not a question of whether you did or didn't paraphrase it correctly. I think we'll always end up reading letters that come in very late, as some do.
like last week, we had that showed up at 5 or 3.
Right. So I think those kinds of letters we'll be reading aloud. But I think you should have the discretion to say, for this hearing, we're only going to read what we think are 10 representative letters. All of them are posted on the web. You can look at them. They've been on the web since the beginning. So I think that covers that issue.
That make sense?
If we weren't going to read the letters, we have to amend our rules and regulations, because in our rules and regulations, we state that all letters will be read.
Okay. And so the appropriate wordage to do that.
That is up to the board. If you wanted to allow for summarization, you could say something to the effect of all letters 1 page or less shall be read into the record. Or letters 1 page or less will be read into the record. And all letters will be posted to the town website.
Rather than trying to write that on the fly, maybe the better way to do it would be to circulate something that could be taken up at our next meeting, or when we're going to take a look at the rules, and then vote on it or amend it or whatever at that time. It may be an easier way to do it.
Okay. So is the consensus on the timing 4 or 5 minutes?
5 minutes is fine with me.
I can read and count.
I think 5 is a wonderful number.
And I agreed.
Okay, so 5. All right. So the second issue, limiting the words and letters to 1 page or a specific number of words. Randy?
I think it depends if it's 1 page typed or handwritten. So,
Yeah, right.
a lot of them are handwritten, right? Correct?
No,
Oh, they're not?
no.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, I think it should still be specified, 1 page typed. And if you want to put in anything about handwritten, it could say 2 pages.
Yeah, the handwritten ones we get, Randy, are usually short, but it takes a while to read them because you have to decipher what is that word.
Right.
You know, it seems like they take a long time because, what word was this? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And would it be a burden, Sarah, to put the letters in the bottom of the, where all the other materials are?
It's just a matter of scanning and uploading it to the
So-
website. Not a huge burden, because I do that to email all of the letters that we have out to you on Tuesdays anyways. It's just doing it, they wouldn't be able to be up there until right before the meeting, because as David said, we do get letters right up until the
I
start
don't
of
think
the
there's a
meeting.
need for I think it's a good idea in a perfect world, but I don't think we need to give Sarah more work. So that's my view on that. I think 1 page typed, goodbye.
I'm happy with that.
I'll still say that I prefer to post them and not limit them to a page or 2 pages.
Well, if they post it, it'll be whatever it is.
It'll be whatever it is, but we then don't have to read it if it's 3 or 4 pages or whatever, but they get the opportunity to submit it. They may want to put a diagram in, or they may want to attach something. You know, there are a lot of different ways people could approach it, and we're trying to build a record here so that other people can see their views. I really don't think we should limit the number of pages or words. It really has not been a problem from that viewpoint, I don't think. It's only a problem in the sense that if we have to read all of them, and they're all 2 or 3 pages, it gets to be a lot of time and effort. So that was my thought.
So what we could do, so we avoid the letters coming in 10 minutes before the meeting, is we give a deadline. All letters must be submitted so that way they can be posted, uploaded to the website no later than the Wednesday of prior to the meeting or something
Yeah,
like
like
that.
noon on the
Something-
Wednesday
yeah.
prior to the meeting.
Something
like
like that, because they do get notice
Yeah.
2.5 weeks prior to the meeting taking place. So that's an option as well.
And they still have the option to appear.
Yes.
Right, they
Sure.
always have.
Okay. So that needs to be legalized.
I will draft some amendments to our rules and regs. That does have to be advertised for a public hearing. My suggestion, because right now I'm working on the December 15th agenda, could we do this for the first meeting in January?
Great. Great. Okay. Thank you, one and all. All right. So, hello, Jay. On to the applications for today. First one is 22-103. Please, Sarah.
Application number 22-103, C&K Chipping Stone LLC, care of William G. Litchfield Esquire, 330 Orleans Road, North Chatham, Mass. 02650. Owner of property located at 90 Chipping Stone Road, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 7H, Block 19, Lot C 370. The applicant seeks to enlarge, extend, or change a nonconforming dwelling on a nonconforming lot via the construction of a second floor and addition. Also proposed is the reconstruction and expansion of a conforming deck. The existing dwelling is nonconforming and then is located 30.6 feet from the road and 10.4 feet from the northerly abutter. The proposed second-floor addition will be nonconforming in that it will be located 30.6 feet from the road where a 40-foot setback is required and 10.4 feet from the northerly abutter where a 25-foot setback is required. The existing building coverage is 2,599 square feet, and the proposed building coverage is 2,806 square feet, where 2,950 square feet is the maximum allowed. The lot is nonconforming in that it contains 28,108 square feet, where 60,000 square feet is required in the R60 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6, and Section 5B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Bill Litchfield here on behalf of C&K Chipping Stone, which in reality is Ron Chima and Rita Bolger, who are here with us today electronically. Also with us is our designer, Bernadette McLeod of Ryder and Wilcox. As this Sarah read, we have some nonconformities on a typical, actually relatively large River Bay lot. It's almost 30,000 square feet. As you know, there are 350 odd houses in River Bay, and they were all developed under prior zoning. So every lot in the neighborhood is non-conforming, so there's nothing terribly unusual about that. The Chima family has owned this house for just under 40 years. And Ron and Rita have the good sense to be planning to retire. One has retired, the other is going to be retiring. And they anticipate being here a lot more than they've been able to be so far. They spent summers here for a long time. Ron's parents owned the house for many, many years until they died several years ago. And their 2 daughters went to Cape Cod Sea Camps over in Brewster and so forth. And they're now fortunate enough to be able to want to renovate this house, which is a 40-odd-year-old ranch. They'd like to expand it, get some more living space, but they had, I think, the good sense to decide, instead of doing a demo and tear down, to build on the existing footprint. They're proposing to change what was there to what is there now. And it's important to observe, as you did when you went out there, and as I will do for a number of different purposes, that when you're heading toward Old Queen Anne Road from Riverview Drive, you can only see a small portion of the existing house, the garage side of the house, because it's so far down below the road. And if you approve the special permit, half of what you see there now is below the elevation of the road. And if you're in a car, there's another 3 feet that's below the elevation of the road. And if you're standing or running, as some do, it's 5 or 6 feet further below the road. So what you see there will not be visible. Having said that, I'll go into the criteria. Sarah has given a fairly straightforward reading of what's proposed. We're proposing to put a second floor on and to expand, as shown there, to expand the existing deck as well. As to the criteria, adequacy of site, notwithstanding the existing nonconformities as to sideline and street setbacks, as well as lot size, the site is adequate for a home built under prior zoning. If you approve the special permit, you can do so based on the finding that the site remains adequate for construction of a 3/4 story above the existing footprint and the addition of a 207 square foot expansion of the kitchen. Also a deck in the rear, an elevated deck. There's no change whatsoever in setbacks, and coverage is still well below the maximum allowed. As to compatibility of size, the lot is relatively large, as I indicated, at just under 30,000 square feet, in a neighborhood where every lot is non-conforming. The existing gross floor area and living area are comparable and compatible with surrounding properties, as is coverage at less than 9%. If you approve the special permit, rather obviously, the gross floor area and the living area will increase. They will increase significantly. That's why we're here. There is no question that adding a second floor is essentially going to double the living space of the home, and that's shown in the third page of the handout. But again, the size is minimized by the topography, because the new ridge of the upper story will still be 30 feet back from the street, more than 30 feet back, because the facade is 30 feet back, and the ridge is further back than that. But again, it's only 16 feet above street level. So the height, the increase in height, which is well below the maximum allowed, is going to be further minimized by the topography. As to the extent of increase in nonconformity, the existing nonconformities are, as noted, street 30 feet where 40 feet is now required, the northerly lot line, and also lot size. If you approve the special permit, there will be no increase in nonconformity. The existing house is and will remain nonconforming as to the sideline of the street, but there's no change whatsoever in those dimensional nonconformities. The additional coverage is still only 2/3 of that which is allowed. As to suitability of site, it's a residential lot in a purely residential neighborhood. A small corner of the house, the northeast corner of the house, is currently within 100 feet of a bordering vegetated wetland above Pickerel Pond. But the Conservation Commission has reviewed this extensively, and I think that you can find the site to be suitable for the addition of the 3/4 story above. The Conservation Commission, I believe there's a letter in there, but they've already issued an order of conditions, which includes a substantial mitigation as well as 2-for-1 replacement of trees. As to scale, sighting, mass, views, and vistas, the existing ranch house, largely below the street level, is not readily visible. But again, it's been home to the Chima family for 4 decades, and they want to continue on in this house. They don't have a desire to move out of the neighborhood. They enjoy the neighborhood, they enjoy the view of the pond, but they'd like to have more living space. To do that requires your approval, and if you do so, the scale will remain appropriate. The architectural plans, which Bernadette has done, echo the existing home to a degree, but it's no longer a ranch. It's now a 1 3/4 story house. But there's virtually no impact on streetscape due to there's a typo here, it says hedge, but it's due to the topography. As to compatibility of use, that doesn't change. It's a residential use, and there is no change. We have town water and 3 bedrooms. The floor plan has been reviewed by the health agent. She has no concerns. The other criteria as to traffic flow and safety, noise and litter, adequacy of utilities are not at issue. So as you know, the question is whether the proposed construction of a 3/4-story addition on the existing footprint with a ridge elevation only about 16 feet above street level is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the current non-conforming structure on a non-conforming lot, almost all of which, as to lot size, every one of which is shared by the other 300-odd houses in the neighborhood, and most have street and sideline setback deficiencies just as we do. Coverage, again, will remain below the maximum. The house itself is largely hidden. I think, given what you hear very often about demolition and rebuilding, that increasing the living space on the footprint without exacerbating nonconformities with an appropriate design should be welcomed. It will allow the next generation of this family to continue to live here. I became aware earlier this week some letters from not immediate abutters, but people who live in the neighborhood. Well, I live in the neighborhood too. But I find, and I can speak as an abutter, I suppose, in that sense, I find that this is not substantially more detrimental. Having said that, I know the chair will give me an opportunity to respond to the letters after he reads them. But I think that ultimately you can find that in light of the criteria in the plans on this location, given the topography of the lot, the second story or 3/4 story is not substantially detrimental, and in fact that the proposed changes as a whole are not substantially detrimental to the neighborhood. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience, either here or online, that would like to speak in favor of this application? If so, please indicate now you'd like to join the meeting.
I see no one that wishes to speak in favor.
I will read the correspondence. The first is from Judith Giorgio, our health agent here in Chatham. She writes on 11/15, "I've reviewed the plan to add a second-story addition. The existing property is considered 3 bedrooms. The plan will maintain the 3-bedroom layout at the property and is therefore acceptable. I have no concerns." Then we have a letter. This is from Marilyn Marks. Her address is 136 Chipping Stone Road. She writes on November 15th, "I am writing to submit a letter of objection for the proposed modification. I'm a neighboring party of interest as a Chipping Stone Road homeowner. Pickerel Pond is one of the few ponds left in Chatham that has a mostly tree-lined shore. It's a peaceful refuge in our neighborhood. Most homes abutting it are modest and unobtrusive. In the photo below, which she sent in, I've circled the current home at 90 Chipping Stone Road, and you'll notice that it and the houses on either side of it are barely visible. This wooded shoreline means the important habitat for wildlife is protected. The proposed site plan shows that only one large pine will be removed. However, based on the drawings, other large pines are very close to the deck. Typically, home insurance policies require that these trees would also need to be removed. In addition to my serious concerns about the fragile pond habitat and the upland wetland, the present home is currently non-conforming." The word non-conforming is listed in 5 places in the application. "Allowing this proposed plan to go forward would put the existing home and lot even further out of conformity. In closing, I strongly object to allowing the proposed changes to go forward as currently planned." Then we have an email. This is from John Beckley, 133 Chipping Stone Road. He writes on November 11th, "I live several doors up the street. I'm writing today to comment on the above application that proposes to add a second story to 90. This raises the roof line by 9 feet. The house is non-conforming due to its close proximity, only 10 feet, to the neighbor to the north and its close proximity to Chipping Stone Road in the front. I oppose the application because of the impact it would have on the neighbor. Looking out at a nearly 30-foot high structure that is only 10 feet from your property line is too much to ask, and it would only worsen the degree of nonconformance. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to comment." Then we have a letter. This is from Roseanne Annoni, A-N-N-O-N-I, and Richard Hunt. They write on November 10th. My wife and I live at 126 Chipping. We wish to object to the planned construction. The plans indicate that the house will double in size, as well as adding some 200 square feet of gross floor area on the first floor and a second floor addition of 1,848 square feet. Also appears that a rather large deck will further expand the footprint of the living space. It is not clear to us whether there are plans for the existing basement to either add bedrooms or to otherwise alter that space in a way that might create even more capacity for the residents. There's little space in between the street and what will be a rather imposing structure if the current plan is approved. And the existing structure is quite close to the property line between 90 and 106 Chipping Stone. The structure is also very close to Pickle Pond, as are most of the houses built along the two ponds in River Bay, owing to the fact that they were built when there were other regulations in place. All of these factors were and are of concern when we learned about the proposed construction. While there are other houses in River Bay Estates that are of an equivalent size, few, perhaps none, are positioned so close to property lines or to the street, and many of the largest houses in our neighborhood are on larger lots. Given these factors, I feel that the proposed plans for 90 will have an unfavorable impact on the neighborhood and may also have a detrimental effect on the water quality in Pickerel Pond. Before becoming year-round residents of Chatham some 7 years ago, my wife and I had been living in California. We'd seen many communities gradually shift away from charming towns and cities of small houses on small lots and become areas where oversized houses crowd one another, creating a dense and unappealing appearance, which also yields a loss of privacy and comfort because the noise from one home can easily be heard in neighboring homes. We cherish the spaciousness and quiet that we have found here in Chatham and hope that it can be preserved even as others discover the appeal and charm of our town. While change is inevitable, we do hope that the ZBA will take the necessary steps to preserve the character of our neighborhood and will not approve the plan that has been submitted for 90. We fully appreciate that the plans have been submitted reflect the wishes of the owners and are likely represent the most cost-effective way to increase the size and beauty of their home. But in this case, we hope that the size of the additions will be reduced and that any second-floor addition will not extend across the entire length of the house, therefore creating a sense of crowdedness vis-a-vis 106 Chipping Stone and hijacking the eyes of those driving or walking along Chipping Stone Road. Thank you for the opportunity to voice our concerns and objections. And then we have a letter. This is from John Alberts, 136 Chipping Stone. He writes on November 8th, I'm writing to submit a formal letter of objection. I'm a neighboring party of interest as the homeowner at 136. In light of the fact that the present home located at 90 is currently non-conforming on the required setbacks, I object to allowing the applicant to make the proposed changes. The current home is only 10.4 feet from the northerly abutter, where a 25 setback is required. Allowing the current home with a height of 19.9 to go to 28.9 would further deter from the neighboring properties. Furthermore, to go from currently a one-story ranch to a nearly three-story rear elevation home would detract from the views across Pickerel Pond. In addition, the proposed changes to this house would not comply with the Chatham Inland Wetland Protection Regulations, as the proposed deck would require the removal of trees and vegetation within 100 feet of Pickerel Pond. Based on these points, I strongly object to the granting of the necessary permits to allow these proposed changes to go forward as currently planned at 90. That's the extent of the correspondence. Before you have a rebuttal, Mr. Litchfield, let's see if there's anybody who wishes to voice their either objection or has a question. So I say to those here or online, if you wish to speak now about your objection or you have a specific question, please indicate now you'd like to enter the meeting.
I see no one that wishes to speak in opposition or has a question.
Rebuttal, Mr. Litchfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some commentary, as I said, I was somewhat surprised to receive those letters. They actually only came from 3 households, not 4. Two came from 136 Chipping Stone. Those houses are further north toward Riverview Drive. And when I saw them, I said, well, they object to the concern about Pickerel Pond. They object to the addition of a second story. And I don't know whether I was surprised or not to learn that only one of those 3 houses from which the letters came is a single-story house. One's a 2-story house, one's a 1.5-story house. So those houses are already in the condition to which they object. As to protection for Pickerel Pond, the Chimas very, very much are concerned about pickerel pond. That is why they worked with the Conservation Commission, with Ryder and Wilcox, to have this approved. To say that it was not in conjunction or would not comply with the Wetlands Protection Bylaw is simply not true. I have the order of conditions from the Conservation Commission, something with which at least one of your members is intimately familiar, and they required the removal of an existing rinse station, mitigation plantings in the buffering vegetated wetland zone, the BVW, maintenance of a path to control foot traffic to the pond. There is an existing path, and they want it maintained. The established vegetable garden, which is within the setback on the BVW, will be maintained only with organic protocols rather than chemistry. There are 2 white pine trees to be mitigated for the removal of 1 scrub pine. Parenthetically, on the north side of the house which is closest to the abutters, the white pines that are there now were planted by Ron Chima's mother many, many years ago. The fact that she did that to provide privacy for her neighbor is telling. It's also telling, I think, that the immediate abutters across the street, to the left or to the right, did not write to object. They expressed no concerns, and the Chimas have good relations with those. Some of the other comments were simply matters of opinion, but some are not, to say that there are no houses which are as non-conforming as this is simply untrue. There are scores, probably hundreds of houses in River Bay which have setback nonconformities or shortages much more egregious than our existing ones, and ours are not changing. I think that is important. So I think you can find, particularly because the footprint is not expanding, that we are respectful of the bylaw, we are respectful of the neighborhood, a neighborhood in which the Chimas have lived for 40 years. I appreciate that neighbors have concerns, but sometimes we need to step back and think about what nonconformity means. Nonconformity comes from a change in the zoning bylaw, and when that happens, certain rights are taken away. But other rights are granted for which you are the relief valve. When zoning in River Bay changed from R20 to R60, which it is now, the law provides appropriately that your rights are not taken away completely. There is instead a process whereby a homeowner like the Chima family has the ability to come to this board. And I know that you know this, but this is for the public and in response to some of the letters. Nonconformity is not a bad thing. 80% of the houses in this town are nonconforming. It simply means that when you want to make a change, which Mr. Briggs deems to be an intensification, that you need to come to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then the Zoning Board of Appeals looks at the overall circumstances, looks at the particulars of what is proposed, and makes a determination that is not substantially more detrimental. Arguably, it might be marginally more detrimental to have this house, instead of just at street level, to be 9 feet above or 16 feet above street level. But if it were a flat lot, it would be much, much higher. It is not. I appreciate the neighbors' concerns. The fact that they are not immediate abutters may give some indication to you that this is not quite so objectionable as some people might see it. I think that you can find that this is not substantially detrimental, and I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to respond.
Okay. Questions from the board? Let's start with Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Mr. Litchfield, I have no questions.
Dave Each.
Yeah, the only thing, Bill, I don't know if you or perhaps Bernadette would know. I was curious when after getting the neighbors' letters, and I went out and looking at the situation, and I just wondered if there's a reason to. There's one tree that they're proposing to take out, and it looks like there's some conflict with where the deck is there. And I just wondered whether there was consideration maybe to, angling the corner of the deck or shortening the deck up in order to keep the tree, or tell me about it.
Bernadette, can you come, you gotta come up here, I'm sorry. I don't know, David. I can tell you that there will be double planting for those trees. There are at least two. And I recognize, of course, that the loss of a tree is to be regretted, but the fact that others too will be planted is a good thing.
I did speak, Bernadette McLeod, Ryder and Wilcox. I did speak with Ron yesterday, and I mentioned that there was some objection to the deck and the size and everything. And his response, and I don't know if he wants to speak, was that they don't use the yard. They don't use the yard. They use the deck because it is elevated, and they have a deck at their other house that's a similar size, and they thought that that size was appropriate. I'm sure if it was a matter of approval or disapproval, we could cut the corner off the deck and save the tree. I don't know what condition the tree is in. I believe it's a scrub pine, and some of those aren't that healthy.
Yeah, I don't know either. I was just I was surprised, and I'm not, this doesn't bear really on my decision here.
Right.
I'm just looking at it and thinking, it's a mature pine tree, of which there are a number on the property.
Right.
And they look pretty good. I don't know, aside, it doesn't look like a scrub pine. It's a big, kind of a tall tree. But if the owners have made that decision, I certainly wouldn't stand in their way. I just had the question.
I don't think they would object to, trying to keep the pine. I know they're planting. They wanted to plant, and it was suggested to them originally to take down more trees, and they objected to it. They didn't want to take down more trees.
Hi, this is Ron Chima. Could I
Yes,
address the
thank you.
board?
Yep.
I want to thank you all for your consideration, and I'd like you to understand our perspective. We are preservationists, and I know it's not the point you're deciding, but just to give you some actual objectives, we own timberland in New Hampshire, which we harvest in a way to keep the forests active and vibrant. We have a house in New Hampshire, and it has a pitch similar to the one at 90 Chipping-Stone, where we hope to retire. And so what we do actually is we have a deck, and it's about the same size, and that's where we spend all of our time, and we let the land grow wild beneath it and don't use any of the property from that deck below it to the shoreline. That's exactly what we are hoping to do here in Chatham. So our life will be on that deck. I'm not so sure we would want to take a corner out. We haven't thought about it. I'm not sure to what extent it makes it unusable. But what I can assure you is that we have approval that we will be very much in favor of preserving the wildlife. We have a letter from the rare species group approving what we want to do. We're planting lots of bushes, blueberries, and others, which we love to have. We will not be using the backyard. Our life will be on that deck, and so, in fact, my mom, when she planted those white pines, she actually personally brought them down from New Hampshire. So I just wanted to let you know that we are very concerned about the health, as Bill said, of the pickerel pond. We would absolutely never do anything to destroy the water quality or the quality of the wildlife in that area. Thank you.
Thanks. I just needed to, and I mean, because to me, I was looking, wow, that's a large deck, but I understand your perspective, and I think it's been well presented. That's the size deck you'd like to have, and this doesn't color my thinking on this matter at all. I think you certainly gave a good explanation. They have the right to do that. They could be planting a couple other trees. The rest of the yard and the trees in the yard it looked to me like it's a really impressive backyard. So, yeah, thanks.
No questions.
Just a quick question, Bill. You have on your chart here, the sizes of the houses, that the current house is 4349 gross floor area and 2052 living area. Is there a basement in the house?
No, that include, there is a basement. I took that off of Bernadette's plans. As you know, when we do the comparison, the assessors don't consider things below grade as part of net area. So I try to make it a 1-for-1, an equal comparison.
And then, so how do you get to 4106? I know with a
Bear with me.
Extra
I'll have to-
story.
I'll have to open up the plan. The 4106 is her first floor living area 2258 and second floor 1848. That's where it came from.
right, so I'm
There,
just,
there is additional area in the space, but in the basement, I didn't include it because I don't have it
Okay.
for the other houses.
okay, fair enough. Then you said, I think when you were reading under the scale and citing, virtually no impact on streetscape due to hedge, but you said there was something.
That was a typo in what you have in front of you. Topography is what it was
Topography.
supposed to
So
have
it's not-
said.
Okay,
Although it is, the front yard is quite well vegetated.
yeah, I know, I noticed that. I didn't see a hedge, that's why.
No, there is not a hedge, and I apologize for that. I corrected it when I went through it, but I didn't see it until I read it.
Okay, that's all I had.
Randy?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Litchfield. So when you say no change to streetscape, maybe I'm not understanding what, it will actually, the house can be up, so it's a huge change to the street.
There will be a change in streetscape, but not a significant or, in my opinion, detrimental effect.
No, I understand not detrimental, but, so it'll just be basically higher up. 'Cause
9 feet
Right now, the
higher.
house is in an actual hole. So in that respect, maybe some people would think it would look better, because you could, right. And
Yeah,
then the
the-
other thing is, when you characterized how many people wrote letters, can you just say that one more time? How many, like, families?
There were 3 houses, 126, 136, and I think one, I'll come up with the other number.
But are you under the
126,
understanding
136,
that
and
that's
one
all
other
one
house.
family, essentially? They're all related to each other?
One letter was from 2 people in one house. 2 letters were from 2 people in the same house.
So 2 different houses?
And a third house, which just had one author.
Okay. Thank you.
Paul?
I have no questions.
Okay. Paul?
I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Need a vote on that?
Buck votes yes.
Second, thank you.
All votes yes?
Dave Thompson votes yes.
Dave Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. Deliberations, Dave Veach.
Yeah, I certainly find that this is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. It meets all of the applicable criteria. I went back out there after I saw the letters and I looked at this again from the far side of Pickerel Pond, and the house that's there is pretty well obscured by the trees, and even with the second-story addition, it's going to remain pretty well obscured by the trees. It's certainly, and I did note kind of, because this, look at this, the map that we get, the online map, and they're and I had noted too that, there were 3 households that sent letters in objection, but there are 17 notified abutters also, total, So that, and as Bill pointed out, the immediate abutter at 106, which is the closest where that 10-foot difference is, didn't respond. None of the other neighbors across the street or nearest by. So I think that it's reasonable to think that the neighborhood, by and large, does not have problems with this either. So I will support it.
Buck?
So when I see 3 or 4 letters of opposition, or 3 or more, what bothered me was there was no letters of support. It's easy to look, and it's easy to write a letter of support. As I've said before several times, writing letters of opposition in a neighborhood is not is not the same thing as writing a letter of support, but there are no letters of support. So that bothers me. And I would have to say those letters are kind of a reason to say it is substantially detrimental to the neighborhood.
Bill?
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen some supporting letters, I think particularly from the people across the street, directly across from it. But when I looked at it, and I looked at it from the other side of Pickerel Pond as well, and from the street view, given the vegetation and the replanting that's going to be done, I think if I were voting, I would be in support of this application.
Randy?
I'll say first that if I were voting, I would definitely support it. I think it's going to be an improvement to the neighborhood. I don't particularly think a house in a hole is very attractive at all. Not at all. That was the first thing I looked at. No offense to the owners, but I was like, So I think it's a great idea. And I think what happens with letters is that they cause you to pause, and then you take in what's in them. And if they're reasonable, they might even cause you to, to really question the applicant. But I don't think these letters were necessarily based in fact. A lot of the, things that were said, I think, were erroneous. So I think letters are important, but they're not always dispositive of the opinion that this won't be detrimental to the neighborhood.
Paul?
I did go back out and look at the property again after receiving the letters to see what I thought the impact would be. And this lot is very well vegetated, and it seemed to me that the area between 90 and 106 is really quite hidden. So I think the fact that the house is well below road level now, and it's being increased in size, is not detrimental to the neighborhood. So I think overall, I would vote in favor. It's not substantially detrimental.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I was looking at the letters who are opposing this, and they're all from the same little spot here, a ways away from 90, which I don't know what to think about that. I don't want to. It's going to be a good addition to the neighborhood. It's logical to go up, I would imagine. It's less expensive, considering I've done some work on my house recently. Wouch. It's going to be a good addition. I'm going to definitely vote yes.
Yeah, from my standpoint, Buck brings up an interesting point about no favorable letters, but when I went out to view the situation, the letters had been sent by Sarah, so I had the ability to have them in my hand. And I couldn't understand why the people objecting to it were objecting to it. I just didn't understand it. And it's unfortunate that close neighbors weren't asked to write a letter, because most folks would, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't vote in favor of this. I just think using our criteria, this qualifies. It is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. Paul?
In conditioning, do you know, Bill, what the plans are in terms of construction?
Bernard? Maybe next fall, so a Labor Day would work.
And I guess one way or another, they're going to need to have construction vehicles and so forth, either on-site or neighboring properties with permission. All right, I will move to approve the application as submitted with the condition that all construction activity and vehicles be contained on-site or at a neighboring property with the permission of the property owner, that between June 30th and Labor Day, no exterior construction would be allowed, no work would be permitted on weekends, and construction activity would be between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
Dave Veach seconds.
Okay. Buck, how do you vote? Yes or no?
I'll vote yes.
Paul?
Paul votes yes.
I vote yes.
I vote yes.
And Dave Veach votes yes.
That's a unanimous decision, Mr. Litchfield.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
very
much.
much. Okay, Sarah, 22-104, please.
Application number 22-104, JMCMCS LLC, care of William G. Litchfield Esquire, 330 Orleans Road, North Chatham, Mass. 02650. Owners of property located at 476 Nob Hill Road, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 13G, Block 13, Lot TH3. The applicant seeks to modify special permit number 22-062 granted on August 11th, 2022, which allowed for the construction of a second-floor addition. The applicant now seeks to modify the special permit to allow for the construction of a covered porch and second-floor deck. The proposed porch and deck will comply with all bulk and dimensional requirements of the bylaw, but is considered a substantial alteration under the second except clause of Section 6 of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A. Such substantial alteration requires the grant of a special permit. The existing building coverage is 1,305 square feet, 11.9%, and the proposed building coverage will be 1,424 square feet, 13%, where 15% is the maximum allowed. The lot is nonconforming in that it contains 10,955 square feet, where 20,000 square feet is required in the R20 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Sections 6 and 9, and Sections 5B and 8D 2B of the protective bylaw.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Bill Litchfield here on behalf of John and Maureen Hiller. For those of you who were here in August, and I think it's all of you, this should come as no surprise. We told you at the time when we asked for permission and you granted a special permit to add a second story that after the filing, but too late for re-advertising, the Hillers had decided they'd like to have a front porch. And that increases coverage. They'd also like to have a conforming deck, elevated deck in the rear. And we told you at that time we would come back for that purpose. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if I can meet your five-minute rule, but I will do my best under the circumstances. As to adequacy of site, including building coverage and setbacks, you already found the site adequate for the addition of a three-story above to a conforming house built in 1965. The sole nonconformity is lot size. I think you can find the site adequate for the addition of a small front porch and an elevated deck at the rear. The increased coverage is well below the maximum allowed as to compatibility. All of the lots in this neighborhood are non-conforming. This will remain compatible because there's no change whatsoever in gross floor area or living area. It remains a reasonable and modest home. As to the extent of increase in nonconformity, there is none. The only nonconformity is lot size. That's patently not changing, and the coverage still complies. As to suitability of site, there's no change, no impact on the natural environment. Scale, sighting views, sighting mass views and vistas. The addition of a porch at the front will further improve the facade. You spoke approvingly of what we had proposed to do for the house, and the rear deck will not be visible. It remains reasonable and appropriate for the site. It's consistent with the surroundings without impact on views and vistas. The neighbors to the rear and town property of the cemetery have no complaints whatsoever about this proposal. The other criteria as to compatibility of use, there's no change. Adequacy of water or sewer or otherwise, no change. The question is whether the addition of a porch and a deck conforming as to all dimensional and coverage requirements without changing gross floor area or living area are substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. I think that you can find that they are not. The house will remain compatible. This is, as you will recall from last time, a Bjorkland or Bransford case where a special permit is required for any but minor changes to even a conforming house like this one. If the lot is non-conforming, the addition of the front porch and the rear deck arguably doesn't intensify it, but because we had to come for the three-quarter story and would have liked to have come at the same time but couldn't, I think you can find that it's in no way detrimental. So given the prior approval of the plans, which you found to be an improvement, I think you can find that these modest changes are further improvements, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience or Microsoft Teams who would like to speak in favor of this application? If so, please indicate now you'd like to join the meeting.
I see no one that wishes to speak in favor.
I'll read the correspondence. This is a memo from Judith Giorgio, Chatham's health agent. She writes on November 15th, I've reviewed the plan to modify the special permit for this property. The addition of a covered porch and roof deck will not encroach on the existing septic. I have no concerns. That's the extent of the correspondence. Is there anyone in the audience, either here on Microsoft Teams, that wishes to either ask a specific question or speak against this application? If so, indicate now you'd like to join the meeting.
I see no one that wants to speak in opposition or has a question.
Okay, questions from the board. Buck?
Buck has no questions.
Bill?
No questions.
No
Randy?
question.
Paul?
No questions.
Dave?
No questions.
No questions, Dave.
Okay.
I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Veach seconds.
Need a vote
Buck
on
votes
that?
yes.
All
Paul?
votes yes.
Dave?
Dave Thompson, yes.
Dave Veach votes yes.
I vote yes. All right. Bill?
Yeah, this is certainly not more substantially detrimental, and I would support it.
Randy?
Agreed.
Yes, I agree.
I agree.
As do I.
As do I.
As do I.
I'll move to approve the application as submitted.
Dave Veach seconds.
Buck says yes.
All votes yes.
Dave Thompson votes yes.
Dave Veach votes
I
yes.
vote yes. That's a unanimous decision. Thank you, Mr. Litchfield.
much. That was close, but.
That was very good. Very good. Okay, 22-059, please, Sarah.
Application number 22-059, Kevin V. Steinhauer and Susan R. Steinhauer, care of William F. Riley Esquire. P.O. Box 707, Chatham, Mass. 02633. Owners of property located at 37 Seaview Street. Also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 15E, Block 6, Lot 16. The applicants seek to enlarge, extend, or change a nonconforming dwelling on a nonconforming lot via the construction of an addition. The existing dwelling is nonconforming and that it is located 18.6 feet from the road. The proposed addition will be nonconforming in that it will be located 24.2 feet from the road where a 25-foot setback is required. The existing building coverage is 1,304 square feet, 9.3%, and the proposed building coverage is 1,495 square feet, 10.6%, where 15% is the maximum allowed. The lot is nonconforming in that it contains 14,024 square feet, where 20,000 square feet is required in the R20 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6, and Section 5B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw. This was continued from July 28th and September 22nd, 2022.
Mr. Riley. All right.
Good afternoon, Bill Riley on behalf of the Steinhauers. Would you put up the plans we filed with the application? Perfect, right there. Now, as you can see by looking at this plan, that's not an attractive building. Luckily, the Steinhauers went to Rick Roy, and he revised the design, and we've submitted new plans. I just want to show you how forward-thinking my clients are. So that's the new design. So the ridge of the addition is now no higher, or only a little bit higher, than the ridge of the existing house. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that change. I don't know where that guy came from, what they used for the design, but somewhere outside of Mars, I think. Anyway, so the reason for the change is that the Steinhauers, who've owned the property for about 20 years, are approaching retirement, and they want to be able to live here full-time. And so this expansion, gives them a family room and an expanded kitchen. The family room is where the garage used to be. And then on the upstairs, it gives them room for a really full master bath, master bedroom, master bath. So that's, that was the reason for the change. And and I think with the revision of the design, it's really much more in keeping with the, standard cape. It's a full cape. The original building was built sometime in the 40s. We did have to go to historic, and the building, while cute, was deemed not to be historically significant. So we're past that. So the question really is, is this design substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure? And, I don't know if you've driven up Seaview Street lately, but it seems like the houses on the west side of the street, if it runs basically north and south, tend to be pretty modest additions, whereas if the buildings on the east side of the street fall into the ginormous category. Attractive, but huge. So I think the Steinhauers, rather than going with the rather large structure, doing a tear down, build a new building, they really have done a very modest change with a design that's very much in keeping with the original design. And what I'll do is I'll just run through the criteria. So adequacy of the size of the site in terms of the size of the proposed use. We're only increasing the building coverage from 9.3% to 10.6%. It meets all setbacks, although there's a small section of the building that doesn't quite meet the 25-foot setback from the street, right there. Compatibility of the size of the proposed structure with neighboring properties, and I don't know if I did we did on the third page, I show you the information from the neighboring properties, which shows it really is very modest in size compared to some of the other buildings on the street. So the proposed increase in the non-conforming nature of the structure, we're increasing the living area, and under Bjorkland and Bransford, that's an intensification of the nonconformity. But other than that, there's very little change in the nonconforming nature of the structure. Suitability of the site, including but not limited to impact on neighboring properties, on the natural environment, including slopes, vegetation, wetlands, groundwater, water bodies, and stormwater runoff. While there is a slope on the rear of the lot that goes down to a wetland, our property is not within the Conservation Commission jurisdiction, and we think that stormwater from the hardscape and the roof would continue to be collected in the front part of the lot rather than running off to the rear, as it always has been. Impact of scale, siting, and mass on neighborhood visual character, including views, vistas, and streetscapes. Given the magnitude of the changes on residents up and down Seaview Street in the last decade, the applicant believes that his proposed change will not have a negative impact on the neighborhood visual character. Scale, siting, and mass is in keeping with the neighborhood and will not have a negative impact on the streetscape. It will not affect any views or vistas. And for those reasons, he believes, that it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, which I think is pretty obvious when you look at the rendering that Rick Roy has provided. What he's really done is making changes that would have been made if the application if the changes have been made back in the 50s. And so he's keeping the same elements of design. And so we think that aside from, losing the garage, it's really a great project for this neighborhood. That'll be our presentation.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience, either here or on Microsoft Teams, that wishes to speak in favor of this application? If so, please indicate now you'd like to join the meeting.
I see no one that wishes to speak in support.
I'll read the correspondence. It's dated November 8th. It's from Christina Bassett. And she writes, 37 Seaview was heard by the CHC on October 18th. The commission determined that the home was not historically significant, therefore no demolition delay was imposed. Is there anyone in Microsoft Teams that wishes to speak against this application or has a specific question? If so, please indicate on the screen now you'd like to join the meeting.
I see no one that wishes to speak in opposition or has a question.
Okay, questions from the board. Paul?
I think that we only got these plans by email, unless I'm mistaken. I don't have hard copies. I don't know whether other people do. Okay.
They were submitted and should have been included in your packets.
Mr. Chair, I have about 8 copies right here I could disperse.
Well, that's where they were all sent to Jay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that was a smart move, because he knows what's going on, right?
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
These are all autographed?
And in terms of the site plan, does the site plan reflect this design?
There's no change in the footprint. So the answer is the site plan hasn't changed.
So what's reflected as the new addition, new patio, are still the same?
Yes, that's correct. The only thing the new design by Rick Roy does is it changes the roof lines so they're more coherent with the existing design. If you want to put it back up on the screen, Sarah, please, and leave it there.
So concepts for review is in fact the final depiction of what we're going to approve? This is labeled concepts for review.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I don't think I have any other questions.
Dave?
Thank you. I have no questions, Bill.
And I have no questions, Dave.
Buck?
Buck has no questions.
Bill?
No questions.
Randy?
No questions.
I'll move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Beach seconds.
Need a vote? Buck?
Buck votes yes.
All votes yes?
Dave Thompson, yes.
Dave Beach votes yes.
And I vote yes. Deliberations. Dave Thompson?
Thank you. This is, I think, a nice-looking home. It's not big for the area. And I think Mr. Riley is right in saying as you go down Seaview Street, the big ones are on the right, on the CBI side, and the smaller ones are on the left. That's heading towards the ocean. It's not going to overpower the neighborhood or anything. I think it's a good plan.
Yes, well, thank you, Rick Roy, because you made some improvements in this design that make it a lot easier for me. I think I had asked for some more either at least another elevation or rendering with the plans that we were given before. And because I didn't think that they really represented as well as they could have what the building would look like. And, I looked at this plan and I thought, it doesn't really look that great, but I'm wrestling with, is it substantially more detrimental? And I probably would have reluctantly supported it in its former condition. That's been totally corrected with this new design by bringing that roof line down, putting dormers on it. This is a fit. So thank you. It's certainly not substantially more detrimental in the neighborhood. It meets all our criteria, and I'll support it.
So I'd like credit for agreeing with Mr. Veach 100%. I went so far as to look at the original design, which I still thought was what we were going to be voting on today. And I found a way that I could support it, even though I didn't like it, by looking at 150 Main Street, which is almost an exact, it was an exact copy. The setback on 150 Main Street for the big, I'll call it the 3-story tower, was a little greater, which helped break it up. This one only had a 2-foot separation, but now that Mr. Roy's entered the picture, I'm all smiles, and I appreciate it.
Bill?
I would agree with what Dave and Buck said. It's certainly an improvement, what Rick's done, and it's not substantially more detrimental, and I would support it.
Randy?
I would agree with what everybody has said.
Paul?
Yes, I agree. This is definitely a better design, and I appreciate that, and it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. So I'll move to approve the application, I'll move to, have I already?
Yeah, you can do that.
I'll move to approve the application as submitted. I guess the question is conditions, because we see an awful lot of construction on Seaview and an awful lot of trucks and everything else up there.
I think they'd like to get started because it's actually a pretty modest addition, and I think they feel they can be tight to the weather before the end of June. So we'd like to be able to, you can have, if you want to have summertime restrictions, clearly they have to park off the street. They can't park on the street. But other than that, I don't know if you want to impose summer restrictions or not, but, clearly, I think they're going to be ready to go, tight to the weather, by the end of June, so.
Well, if our standard conditions would be all construction activity and vehicles be contained on site or at a neighboring property with the permission of the property owner, which sounds as if that's fine.
Right.
That between June 30th and Labor Day, there would be no exterior construction allowed, which it sounds as if that will be okay.
I think that's fine.
No work would be permitted on weekends.
Right.
And that the construction activity would be between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
Yeah, during the summertime, right?
All right?
Yep.
I'll move it, approval on the basis of those conditions.
And Dave Veach seconds.
Buck approves.
Paul approves.
Dave Thompson, yes.
Dave Veach votes yes.
I vote yes, unanimous decision. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you
Riley.
very much.
Okay. Sarah, 22-105, please.
Application number 22-105, Chatham Oyster Pond Properties LLC, care of William G. Litchfield Esquire, 330 Orleans Road, North Chatham, Mass. 02650. Owners of property located at 101 Oyster Pond Furlong, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 13E, Block 25,
Thank
Lot
you.
R24. The applicant seeks to enlarge, extend, or change a non-conforming dwelling on a non-conforming lot via the construction of porches. The existing dwelling is non-conforming and that it is located 9 feet from the northerly abutter, 23.3 feet from the southerly abutter, and 23.2 feet from the road. One of the proposed porches will be non-conforming, and that it will be located 27.5 feet from the road where a 40-foot setback is required, and 20.8 feet from the southerly abutter where a 25-foot setback is required. The existing building coverage is 1,387 square feet, 13.3%, and the proposed building coverage is 1,546 square feet, 14.8%, where 15% is the maximum allowed. The lot is non-conforming and it contains 10,435 square feet, where 40,000 square feet is required in the R40 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6, and Section 5B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Litchfield, here on behalf of Chatham Oyster Pond Properties, and Ed Scopus, who is that entity, and Ed is here electronically. I decided to bring all my porch presentations to you in one day, because that is why we are here once again. This is a renovation of a circa 1953 post-war ranch, lived in for many years by the family of the original owner of the entire neighborhood. Ben Rollins' daughter lived here for many, many years, and Ed has owned it for a number of fairly recently. And it's sort of tired, and he'd like to make some changes. And we are here today because that's what is proposed. Thank you, Sarah. To change the existing sort of ranch or cape ranch to what we think is a more attractive dwelling. That in itself, however, the dormers are all completely conforming, so that doesn't require your review. What does require your review and your approval, we hope, is two porches. The one on the front is at the bottom by the cursor, is a little bit too close to the lot line. It is less close than the existing house, but because the porch comes out the same angle at the house, it is 20.8 feet to the lot line where 25 feet is required. Of course, this entire neighborhood was developed, I think, pre-zoning. They're all 10,000 square foot lots. Zoning didn't come into play until 1954, and this house was built in 53. And we were also somewhat surprised, although it's fairly obvious because it's shown on the plan, that the porch on the rear, where the cursor is now, is technically too close to Tabitha Terrace. Tabitha Terrace is not Route 28. It is not completely a paper road, but it's pretty close to it. But nonetheless, we are too close to Tabitha Terrace for the rear porch. We think, frankly, people who live in the house think of that as a rear lot line, but it is technically a street, so we need relief for that porch as well. So what is proposed is there's another porch shown off the driveway, but that conforms, so there are not any issues there. So I'll go into the criteria. And by the way, the coverage from all of the porches, if you approve the special permit, is within the coverage limit. As to adequacy of site, the site is adequate for an existing home built before zoning, notwithstanding the proximity to the streets and the lot size. If you approve the special permit, you can do so based on the finding that the site is adequate for the addition of the porches. Coverage complies at 14.8%, and the rear porch is further from the street than is the existing house. The same applies on the south side. Pardon me. As to compatibility of size, all the lots of the neighborhood are non-conforming. The current house at less than 1,400 square feet, footprint of less than 1,400 square feet, is smaller than most. There is a comparison on the third page, and I think you can find that it remains compatible. The gross floor area and living area of the house aren't changing. All that is changing, of course, is the porch coverage, which are part of an upgrade to and renovations of the existing house. As to the extent of increase in nonconformity, there is some. It is minimal. 2.5 feet closer to the southerly lot line, 20.8 rather than 23.3, and none toward Tabitha Terrace. The front porch there the porch there is 27.5, while the house is now 23.3. The resulting coverage, again, is still compliant and less than is the case with several abutters on Oyster Pond or Tabitha Terrace. As to suitability of site, the site has been developed for nearly 70 years. The environmental issues have been addressed with the Conservation Commission. There are mitigation plantings, and happily enough, the owner has decided to remove the asphalt drive, replace it with a pervious stone and shell mix, which will lessen runoff down Oyster Pond Furlong and ultimately into Oyster Pond. So with the mitigation plantings, I think you can find it to be a net environmental improvement. As to scale, citing mass, views, and vistas, what is there is typical of what was in the neighborhood when it was really originally developed. If you approve the special permit, there is, of course, no change in mass or siting, and the house itself doesn't change, but the porches, which are appropriately designed for the house, will benefit the overall appearance, and I think there's no impact, certainly no negative impact, and perhaps a positive impact on streetscape, but none at all on views and vistas. As the compatibility of use, there's no change. The residential use will continue. Adequacy of water and sewer, we have town water, town sewer, 3 bedrooms. The health agent has written that she has no concerns. So as you are aware, the question is whether the addition of 3 porches, 122 square feet on the Oyster Pond furlong side, 35 square feet by the garage, both of which are conforming, and 30 square feet at the rear, which is less non-conforming than the existing house, are substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the current non-conforming structure. The house will remain modest, the gross floor area and living area will remain compatible, there's no change in either. But the porches, together with other renovations, will, I think, improve the overall importance. Coverage is compliant, the 2.5-foot further encroachment into the sideline on the southerly lot side is very minimal. So in light of the criteria in the plans, I think that you can find that the proposed changes are not substantially more detrimental, and be happy to answer any questions.
Is there anyone here or in Microsoft Teams who would like to speak in favor of this application? If so, please indicate on the screen you'd like to be included.
I see no one that wishes to speak in favor.
Correspondence, this is from Judith Giorgio, health agent for the town. She writes on 11/15, I've reviewed the plan to add covered porches. The change does not increase the sewage flow. The property is connected to the municipal sewer system. I have, she says, any objection? I have no objections or concerns, I presume is what she really meant. So then we have a note. This is from Nicole Smith, conservation agent for the town. She writes on Monday, November 14th, the project was approved and an order of conditions will be issued on November 16th. That's from the Conservation Commission. That's the extent of the correspondence. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak against this application or as a specific question? If so, please indicate on the screen you'd like to be recognized.
I see no one that wishes to speak in opposition or has a question.
Okay, questions from the board. Does anybody have a question? Paul?
I hear no questions, so I will move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
Dave Veach seconds.
Buck
Vote,
approves.
please.
All approves?
Dave Thompson approves.
Dave Veach approves.
And I approve. Deliberations. Randy?
No, it meets all the criteria, and if I were voting, I would support it.
I agree. I think it meets all the criteria. It's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. I will vote to approve.
I agree, and I'll vote in favor.
Yes, and I also would just like to comment, it's kind of refreshing to have such a modest proposal come before us. But, yeah, I approve.
And that's 2 modest ones in a row. Wonderful. I'll support it.
And I would support it as well.
I'll move to approve the application as submitted, but the question is, do you see any need for conditions here?
Now, thank you for asking, Mr. Sample, if I could, Mr. Chairman. The homeowner is ready to go, so I think we could live with the June 30th cutoff. I think he'd like to be done by Thanksgiving. That's not going to happen, but we can live with those standard conditions.
All right, then I'll move to approve with conditions that all construction activity and vehicles be contained on site or at a neighboring property with the permission of the property owner. And between June 30th and Labor Day, no exterior construction would be allowed. No work would be permitted on weekends, and construction activity would be between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
Dave Veach seconds.
Buck votes yes.
Paul votes yes.
Dave Thompson, yes.
Dave Veach votes yes.
I vote yes. That's a unanimous decision. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you very
Litchfield.
much.
Okay, Sarah. And Paul, I do believe that you were chairing the meeting when this was up before, so I will defer to you.
I think that's correct. All right. Why don't we go ahead and proceed with reading the notice? Sarah?
Application number 22-081, Scattery LLC, care of William F. Riley Esquire, P.O. Box 707, Chatham, Mass. 02633. Owner of property located at 229 Scattery Road, also shown on the Town of Chatham's Assessor's Map 17J, Block 2, Lot 11. The applicant seeks to enlarge, extend, or change a non-conforming dwelling on a non-conforming lot via the demolition of the existing dwelling and the construction of a new dwelling and soak pool. The existing dwelling is non-conforming in that it is located 8 feet from the Coastal Conservancy District, floodplain elevation 14. The proposed dwelling will be non-conforming in that it will be located 13 feet from the Coastal Conservancy District, where a 50-foot setback is required. Also proposed is the construction of a new driveway as allowed by special permit under Section 4A3D of the bylaw. The existing building coverage is 2,186 square feet, 60.8%, and the proposed building coverage is 2,775 square feet, 77.2%, where 15% is the maximum. 15%, but not more than 2,800 square feet is the maximum allowed. The lot is non-conforming in that it contains 3,596 square feet of buildable upland, where 20,000 square feet is required in the R40 zoning district. A special permit is required under Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 6 and 9, and Sections 5B and 8D2B of the Chatham Protective Bylaw. This was continued from September 22nd, 2022.
Mr. Riley, would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you. Bill Riley on behalf of the Ferris family that owns the property at 229 Scattery Road. We were here some time ago, and the vote at that time, we had 2 negative votes. And so what we'd like to do is review the changes we've made, having those comments in mind for those members. But also, I think one of the things that perhaps I didn't do well enough in our last meeting was highlight, the sort of the limited nature of this structure. I mean, there's a presumption because it's new, that, well, it's a big house. Well, it's really not that big a house. And I know that was a concern of the members who were negative votes. And so one change we did make was we reduced the ridge of the house a little bit, so that the height of the structure now, above the foundation, is 21 feet and 6 inches, so 21 and a half feet from the top of the foundation to the ridge, which I think by any measure is a modestly sized 1.5-story structure. And I know as a part of our conversation last time, when we represented that we thought that this building with this 1.5-story height fit in the neighborhood, we got some pushback because at least one member indicated that, well, the building right behind us, the Schroeder house, is a 2-story house, and the building right in front of us, the Foley house, is a 2-story house. But the other houses really aren't that big. So I have driven down Scattery Road many times, and I did it again today, and I realized while I was driving down there that all the houses you see, but for 1 or 2, once you come once you come east of Old Harbor Road, are all 1.5-story or 2-story houses. So we just switch one of the, I don't care which way you go. So this is the Holmes house out on Salt Pond Road. clearly visible from Scattery Road. And as you can see, so that house is a full 2 stories. And the garage, which by the way was recently approved here, is all, you know, because we modified, it used to be just a 1-car garage. Now, it's a 2-story with a, basically, living quarters on the 2nd floor. Then go over to the next building. That's the Varholic residence. And I don't know who was here when we went through this process. That's on Old Wharf Road. And the neighbors there were vehemently opposed to it. And because we had it kind of on the top of the hill, and, oh, that's the view everybody loves when they go walking over Old Wharf Road, and you look out at the ocean, and if you put the house there, you can't see the ocean anymore. So we ended up sliding it down Old Wharf Road closer to Scattery, but this is the house that was approved. And what's the other one we have up? No, there's a third house over on Linnell, there you go, on Linnell Lane. So that's on Linnell Lane. That house was rebuilt, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And so these are the houses you see from that neighborhood. So I wanted to correct the impression that, you know, all the other houses in the neighborhood are lower or smaller. And the most dramatic building is, what's the address, Sarah? 24 Salt Pond, which was approved a year ago. Now, there's no such thing as precedent, as we know, but I just want to, you know, the idea is, well, all the other buildings are 1 story. This building, and from the top of the foundation to the ridge, is either 27 or 28 feet. I have trouble seeing it. Scroll up or down, however you get to the next. Maybe it's on the other sheet. There you go. 27 feet from the top of the foundation to the ridge. And ours currently is 21 and a half feet. So so I just wanted to correct the impression that was left at our last meeting, that this building is the only 2-story building in the neighborhood. I mean, the fact is that there are many. The 1-story buildings are the ones that tend to be left, like the Sampson House, which is basically across Scattery Landing from our locus. So, in any event, I thought it was important to put our design in context with the neighborhood. Because the question really is our design substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure? So I hope, having established that our design is very similar to many of the designs in the neighborhood, that from a design point of view, it's not substantially more detrimental. Now, one of the other concerns that was expressed had to do with massing. And so when you look at our plan here, it's a little misleading because, of course, the garage is separate from the house. And in doing that, you really reduce the apparent mass of the structure. So if you were driving down to Scattery Landing and you looked over, well, at one point, you know, basically the garage would mask most of the house. You know, as you get closer to the water, then the side view of the house would come into play. Mike Tartamella's visiting with us online, and he put together this sketch, which I'll let him address, but basically shows that our structure isn't substantially larger than these other structures. But, so do you want to talk to that, Mike? You're muted. Mike, you're muted.
Thanks, Bill. Yes, good evening, everyone. Mike Tartamella, Patrick Ahern, architect. So what we did following the last hearing was sort of step back. If we could go to slide 4 and take a sample size, a little bit larger sample size of the surrounding homes. And I think as Bill showed in the photographs that were helpful, we took a little bit more of a look at the statistics of those houses with respect to lot size and also net square footage. And I think one of the things we started to looking at what we call here as a figure ground map is, you know, the overall footprint in terms of mass and scale was very similar to surrounding homes. We could go to the next slide. When we took a little bit more of a study on the lot square footage, we're sort of right in the middle in terms of lot square footage, middle maybe on the upper side, but not inconsistent with a lot of the houses in the area. And again, you know, based on the challenges that we have with our site in terms of its buildability and a buildable upland, we put together a house that's conforming in terms of setbacks, but really works within the site and maximizes what the build envelope could be. If we could take a look at the next slide, please. One of the conversations that we did have in the last hearing was with respect to scale of homes in the area. We looked at net square footage and did the comparison on that because that's really the data that's available through the town, as everyone knows, through the assessor's cards. But when we look at net square footage, we've got a lot of similar size houses. And when you look at the footprint, which is what we call, again, the figure ground, we're very similar. And I think, you know, the net square footage conversation is somewhat, or square footage for any matter, is somewhat deceiving, where a house may have a similar scale, but half the square footage simply by the fact that it has cathedral spaces inside. So when we're talking about square footage as the sole factor in determining mass and scale, I think the next slide, where it shows photographs that Bill had put up prior, which is slide 9, if you could, this starts to show a comparison of a lot of those surrounding homes, that the more surrounding homes that we were looking at that are more adjacent to the property. If you look at 189, for example, it's a very similar scaled house from a volume standpoint, but the square footage is quite different because there must be, and you know, we haven't been in the house, but there must be different spaces in that house that change that net square footage number. So if we could go back one slide to slide 8, just to highlight the other changes that were made, we also went out and surveyed the existing structure and drew up a comparison to the proposed structure. And if we could just, I don't know if you're able to, Sarah, zoom into the bottom drawing. But the bottom drawing shows the adjustments that were made in this proposal in front of you and changes that were made from the last. We lowered the ridge of this, of the proposed new house. We also lowered the chimneys so that now we have a roof to chimney dimension of about 6 feet, where before it was 8'3", and the roof from the existing house to the proposed is 3 feet, where before it was 5'4". So the house is only 3 feet taller than the existing structure, which you can see dashed there in the outline.
Okay. And if you go to the screen that showed the the areas of the houses on the assessor's map, that one. So you see 24, where it says 1,078 square feet. That's where the new building was built. And on the floor plans that were submitted as part of the application, the total square footage of the floor plans, first and second floor, are 3,800 and 77 square feet. So on a much smaller lot. But, I mean, the point of that, the point of all that really is to show that the building does fit in the neighborhood as the neighborhood has developed.
I think, Bill, the other factor too, I think that came up in the last meeting was the house immediately, I guess, to the north and to the south. There's a real disparity between those two structures and the one to the south. If we go back to, I believe slide, well, you can look at it on this slide. That house, 224, shows as 1966 net square footage, where the house at 36 shows 4,037. And also up from there, number 58 shows 2,446, and up from there, 4,602. But 224 is really one of the smallest in the neighborhood, which I realize is a tough comparison for us. But I think as you go north a little bit, you start to see houses that are similar, if not bigger, in the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So I've revised my zoning bylaw analysis, and we sent it out to everybody. I'd just like to run through that if we could. So the adequacy of the size of the site in terms of the size of the proposed use. The applicant believes that the size of the site is adequate because our town meeting made specific provision when a lot has less than the required area of building coverage, of buildable upland. We limit the building coverage to 2,800 square feet. So our proposed structures total 2,775 square feet, less than 2,800 square feet. And while that's, maybe 60% of the buildable upland, it's only 3.2% of the entire lot of 84,000 square feet. I mean, our building's only 31 feet from the top of the coastal bank, but we are further away than the existing house, and it's going to be built on a FEMA foundation. We've also reduced the lateral extent of what is a solid structure in the event of a storm event, where the existing structure, which does not have a FEMA foundation, is 98 feet east to west, and ours is, the existing house is 120 feet east to west, and ours is 98 feet. So in terms of adequacy of the size, we think that, the lot is adequate for our proposal. Compatibility of the site of the proposed structure with neighboring properties. So that's a horse we've been beating to death here for the last 10 or 15 minutes. But again, we just want to point out that the current ridge is only 3 feet taller than the existing ridge. And 1 foot of that height has to do with the fact that our first floor elevation has to be at elevation 15 because of the FEMA requirements. And again, it's only 21 feet from top of foundation, 21 and a half feet from top of foundation to the ridge. So extended proposed increase in the non-conforming nature of the structure or use. So here, we're increasing the living area, and that's clearly an intensification. We're increasing the building coverage in the floodplain, which also would be an increase in the non-conforming nature. However, again, in the last criteria, what's the impact of the lateral expansion on impervious area? Because we have a FEMA foundation, even though we have a slightly increased area, in reality, we actually improve the recharge of water or the handling of stormwater because it would flow through the foundation of the flood vents on the foundation of the property. Suitability of the site, including but not limited to impact on neighboring properties or on the natural environment, including slopes, vegetation, wetlands, groundwater, water bodies, and stormwater runoff. So another concern that we heard at our last meeting was, construction taking place in the floodplain. And I think it's important to have in mind a couple of things. First, floodplain is not a wetland in the sense of something where wetland vegetation is growing or there's an actual body of water. I mean, our floodplain is I shouldn't say a political construct, but, it's a scientific construct based on assumptions made regarding what's going to happen in a storm. And so where you have an existing building that has a solid foundation, replacing that structure with a structure that presents a shorter lateral face by almost 30 feet to the water and has flood vents so the water will pass through. We think that replacing a solid foundation structure in a floodplain is an improvement. That's one reason why the Conservation Commission routinely approves them, because the goal of the regulations, both in the building code and in the FEMA regulations, is to encourage structures that are flow tolerant. I think I mentioned at our last meeting, if you saw the pictures of the damage down in Florida, it's the elevated structures, the structures on FEMA foundations that came through with the least amount of damage. And so, while as a local person who's lived here for 50 years, I don't think we're ever going to see stormwater breaking over the house over there. The scientists think someday that could happen. And the consequence of replacing a solid foundation structure with a FEMA foundation is that the risk of damage, both to this structure and to neighboring properties, is reduced. And so, while the site is in a floodplain, the proposed construction constitutes a significant improvement over how that property, how that floodplain area will be treated in a storm event. So, the proposed house is located over 100 feet from mean high water, and there is a substantial planting plan, about 17,000 square feet. And we have Teresa Sprague here to review that. That's been approved by the Conservation Commission. And based on research that Dave Clark has done, and Dave is also here, that planting along the bank between the water and the structure is going to act significantly to reduce wave runup. In other words, the risk to the property of a wave overtopping the current bank. In addition to the 17,000 square feet of native plants, there's going to be a reduction of 267 square feet of driveway and removal of 2,800 square feet of lawn, which is something that the Conservation Commission seeks. But that'll also help ameliorate the lateral expansion by making the property more readily able to absorb storm waters. And, as a part of the, I was out on the property today, and the part of our planting plan is to we're removing 3 trees. If you were there, there are 3 trees that have a blue tape on them, and they're going to be removed. And so, working with the Conservation Commission, we agreed to install 3 more trees to replace them. And can you put up Teresa's plan? And so the location, we're putting up oak trees, 3 to 4 inches caliper, about 16 feet in height when planted. And if we can ever find the plan, you'll see they're located in an area between the house and garage and the street. And like breaking the garage from the house, the location of those trees is also going to have an impact, reducing the visual impact of the new house when viewed from Scattery Landing, because of where they're going to be located, and they're full canopy trees. So in terms of suitability of the site, I think that along with the approval of the Conservation Commission, the other information that we're providing shows that, the site is suitable and actually will be improved by having a FEMA foundation on the site. The impact of scale, siting, and mass on the neighborhood visual character, including views, vistas, and streetscapes. So this criterion deals with the relationship of the proposed structure to the neighborhood with regard to scale, siting, and mass. So I think scale and siting kind of go together. So this house is 100 feet away from Scattery Landing. And so when you look at the scale of the structure as it fits on the lot, we're only covering 3.2%, and it's 100 feet away from the road. Those elements greatly reduce the visual impact of the structure on the neighborhood. So the bylaw sets a specific amount of building coverage allowed on such a lot. Our proposal complies with that requirement. By dividing the building coverage between the house and the garage, the applicant has reduced the apparent mass, particularly where the garage slab is 4 feet lower than the first floor of the house. So you have the garage, which is lower, then you have the house behind it. And we're going to have these 3 oak trees between the road, the garage, and the house. Another measure of scale is the height of the structure. In our case, the height of the structure is only 21 and a half feet, as we've said before, from the top of the foundation to the ridge. And this ridge is only 3 feet taller than the existing structure. Oh, there's our planting plan. All right, great. So there's quite a bit of growth along the side of the road, as you can see there. Those in what Teresa has shown on her planting plan at the road edge, that's existing materials, which again act as a screen, visual screen for the streetscape. And then you can see the 3 circles kind of clustered. Well, there are 4 circles. Why are there 4 circles, Teresa? Come up and explain it. Anyway, So there are 3 oak trees being planted there, and Teresa can explain the circles because she drew them. But you can see that they're going to provide additional visual buffer from the street.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Teresa Sprague with Blue Flex Design. I do want to point out that this is not the approved plan that's showing here, the conservation approved plan. There were some adjustments made. So the plan that is showing was our original submission. There was a revised submission where the circles that you're looking at that Bill was just pointing to are actually cedar trees that were previously proposed. We were working with the neighbor to the south. They had some concerns that their views would be obstructed. So we switched those trees out and added oak trees that are going to be planted closer to the garage. I want to point out that overall, we're planting 22 trees on this site. So we're removing 3 trees and we're planting 22 trees in total throughout the entire project area. The 3 oak trees that Bill is referring to are located just to the east of the garage and off of the deck area. So that will provide, and those are full-size canopy oaks that will provide the existing trees that are in those locations right now are understory/ornamental trees, smaller cherry trees. So we are proposing to remove those non-native trees and plant larger canopy-sized oak trees in that area that will not obstruct views to the neighbor to the south, but still provide important wildlife habitat value, as well as other functions that Bill is discussing. So in total, on this planting plan, we're planting 270 shrubs, 22 trees. So there's a significant increase in the amount of vegetation that's being planted. Indeed, we are proposing to remove some invasive vegetation that's located between the house and the coastal beach in the area of the coastal dune and coastal bank. But we are not proposing to remove existing cherry trees, existing native beach plum and bayberry that are located in this area, as well as non-native rugosa rose, because while it is non-native, it is still has some significant function as far as protection of that dune area. So we're proposing to leave that in place. So once this planting plan is completed, the density of the planting will be significantly increased over what's currently existing in this area. Thanks.
Thank you. You left your copy up here. That's okay. I just didn't want to start reading from it, that's all. Okay. So when Teresa talks about the neighbor to the south, that's the Foley family, Dr. Dan Foley, who has written another letter to the board supporting our application. So when considering the mass of the structure, the applicant believes it's important to consider what steps the architect has taken to soften the impact of the mass on the neighboring properties. In this instance, the architect has used gambrel gable ends and dormers along the front elevation of the building, and a second level porch and dormers along the east elevation, the one facing Scattery Road. So these items break up the mass of the structure. So what the eye sees, instead of seeing a vertical wall 21.5 feet high, what you really see is a lower level under the deck and an upper level above the deck, but the eye never sees the entire vertical of the building. And we think, and really what we're talking about is visual impact. And what do you perceive when you look at something? So so as I indicated earlier, these items break up the mass, reducing the visual impact, as does the placement of the garage, which has a ridge that is 3 feet lower than the main house. Finally, we come to the question of what impact our design has on the neighborhood visual character, including views, vistas, and streetscapes. We know from the supporting correspondence of our neighbors that we're not interfering with their views or vistas. And we believe that the siting of the house, 100 feet from Scattery Road, with the substantial plantings located between the road and the house, the impact of the property on the neighborhood visual character is not substantially more detrimental than the existing structure. We think the streetscape is improved by our design and our landscaping plan. I think the next section that has any meaning with us today is question 12. For those dwellings located in the floodplain as defined by the flood insurance rate map, the following criteria shall apply. 1, the extent of lateral expansion proposed, and the extent to which lateral expansion impacts the impervious area of the site. So our total building coverage is going to be 2,775 square feet, an increase of 600 square feet over the existing structure. I would like to point out, by the way, that the footprint of the house alone over the existing structure is only 100 square feet greater. The difference comes from the garage. So we believe our lateral expansion will not have a negative impact because it represents a tiny fraction of the total area of the lot, 84,400 square feet. And unlike the existing structure, it will be constructed according to FEMA to allow flood waters to pass under the building, where the existing structure has a solid foundation that prohibits the flow of flood waters. So in addition to having flood vents to allow flood waters to pass underneath, we've also increased the plantings substantially, removing lawn and putting native plantings in. Also, the proposed building is 4 feet further from the coastal bank. We reduced the ocean-facing facade from 120 feet. Wait a minute. I have two different numbers written down. Anyways, from one way or the other, our facade is shorter. Originally, I said 120 to 90. This one said 95.8 to 80.1. Can you help me with that, Mike?
What number are you looking for, Bill?
The lateral facade of the existing house facing the water, and how the new building is shorter, has a shorter lateral facade facing the water.
We don't have an exact dimension, but I think you can see slide 8 would provide that probably.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Okay,
here,
so-
the proposed house, the width on the proposed house is 80 feet, and the existing house is 95 feet, 8 inches.
Okay, so that was I just read. So right now, the existing facade is 95 feet facing the water.
No. That's right, Bill.
Yeah, with a solid foundation, and the proposed house is 80.1 feet. Now, Dave Clark is here. He's our engineer. And he's been doing a lot of research regarding, there were concerns expressed about the proximity of the velocity zone to our proposed structure. So Dave? So number 19, velocity zone, there's a number 19 on it, which sounds a little scary. So Dave's going to explain where the number comes from and why we're not going to see 19-foot waves.
Good evening, David Clark, Clark Engineering. So one of the questions last time was regarding the velocity zone and what does that mean. So whenever an elevation is published on the FEMA map, it's the average elevation over that area. So we have a V19 zone, so the average elevation over that zone, which extends out to North Beach, I believe, the average elevation of waves or wave run-up or waves breaking and creating all that splashing and energy, the average elevation is 19. Offshore, the waves will be less than 19. When waves run up to the shore and they hit the toe of the beach, which is usually down around mean low water, when the wave hits that, they start to build because you have the slope of the beach and the sand acting as drag to the bottom of the wave. So the wave kind of starts to fall over itself, but it builds in height to the point where it reaches a critical stage where it can't support itself anymore and it breaks on the shore. The point where the wave breaks on the shore, FEMA has determined that it's 3/4 of the water depth at that particular location. In that, whatever the water depth is at that location, the physics of everything, the wave, it can't support a wave more than 3/4 of the water depth. So FEMA anticipates that the wave's going to break on the beach, and then from there to where it transitions to the A zone, the splashing, the wave run up, and that energy is dissipating, so that by the time you get to that line, you're now in the A zone, and for the rest of the A zone to the south, the average elevation is 14 in this instance. Now, the FEMA insurance study, which goes along with the FEMA maps, it's quite a thick, not that thick, but a thick document of basically the rationale FEMA used to come up with all the flood elevations for the entire Cape. For Orleans, Harwich, and Chatham, FEMA analysis has stated that what's called the still water elevation, which is the elevation of the storm surge with no wind or waves accounted for. So basically, you take the wind and waves away, what is the storm surge? For Pleasant Bay in this area, it's elevation 9.1. Because we're adjacent to a velocity zone, FEMA adds what's called wave setup, which is the waves breaking on the shore and they start bunching up and the water has no place to go. So in effect, it's raising the still water elevation. In this particular case, the still water elevation is elevation 13.8. FEMA, when they publish the maps, they round everything up to the nearest foot. So that's why we have an A zone elevation 14 here, adjacent to the velocity zone. Looking at the site plan, you'll see that the lowest adjacent grade at the northeast corner of the deck is elevation 11. That's the existing grade. Knowing that the still water elevation plus the wave setup gets you to 13.8. If the ground elevation right there is 11, that means there's only 2.8 feet of water depth at that corner. So that corner cannot physically support a wave that's up to elevation 19. FEMA, like I said, states that the critical height of depth of water in order to support a wave is 3/4 of the depth. So 2.8 times 0.75 gives you the maximum wave you would expect at that corner of the building. The existing grades at the foundation of the new house are almost 12, so you take another foot times the 0.75 off of that number. So we believe that the deck is not in harm's way from significant wave action. In fact, At elevation 11 at that corner, like I said, we can expect waves of less than 3 feet, slightly more than 2. And as Bill stated, the water has places to go where right now it doesn't. We're doing the FEMA foundation as required, so water can flow not only under the deck, but through the foundation, and also the garage, because the garage will have the FEMA compliant vents all around it. So we don't believe that the house has any detrimental effects on the floodplain greater than what the house is, than the house that's there now. Maybe.
All right, and why don't you explain to the members what you learned about the plantings and the effect the plantings have on wave runoff?
So, I went back and looked at a flood study done by the Woods Hole Group for another project we did in town. And it was not part of their calculations, but it was part of their narrative that the possible wave heights that they calculated were higher than what would be expected because they did not account for vegetation. So the more dense the vegetation, the more wave attenuation you have. Not only, and basically the formula that gets put into the FEMA analysis program when they're looking at what's called transects through the town. There's a specific input for, they call the vegetation factor, density or spacing. So if you you decrease the spacing, it helps attenuate waves. If you increase the diameter of the plantings, it helps attenuate waves. And if you increase the height, it helps attenuate waves. So in Teresa's plan, I think one of the members had a question is, gee, you're taking out all the vegetation. Well, we're taking out the non-native vegetation, and what gets put back will be at a higher density, larger caliper, and a larger height. So can't calculate an exact number, but there's a benefit there, an obvious benefit.
Okay, great. That's our science lesson for the day. So that would be our presentation. We have Teresa is here to answer questions you might have regarding the planting plan. Dave is obviously here, able to answer questions on the science side. And Mike Tartamella is here if you have questions regarding the design.
All right, thank you, Bill. I'll ask if there's anyone in the audience or on Microsoft who would like to speak in favor of this project.
I see no one that wishes to speak in favor.
All right, let's go to the correspondence. We have an email from Steve Schroeder. Dear Mr. Nixon, as previously indicated in my email to you of September 21, 2022, I have a home at 36 Whistler Lane, North Chatham, Massachusetts, 02650, directly west abutting Mr. Ron Ferris's property at 229 Scattery Road. My wife Pamela and I are shocked and very disappointed that Mr. Ferris did not get the 4 votes needed from the Zoning Board of Appeals in order to proceed with his design and plans to build his new house at 229 Scattery Road. The size of his proposed house, designed by acclaimed architect Mr. Patrick Ahern, we believe certainly fits nicely on its large lot, and the traditional Cape Cod design of his proposed house is very appropriate for the neighborhood. In fact, the surrounding neighborhood values would be further enhanced by the building of this beautifully designed house. Mr. Nelson, we strongly encourage the Zoning Board of Appeals to reconsider their position and approve Ron Ferris's plans as originally presented. We look forward to your positive reply. Sincerely, Stephen B. Schroeder. I think that Mr. Nelson was meant to be Mr. Nixon.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Nelson.
And then we have a an email from Dan and Deborah Foley dated October 8th, 2022, to Hermit May Concern. We are writing this letter to express our support for this project and request that the board act in the best interest of our neighborhood by approving it. The project will improve our neighborhood in many ways. One, Ron Ferris has told me that the architect Patrick Ahern was specifically hired with the goal of designing a house that looks like it was been there for 100 years. Knowing Ahern's work as I do, this home will complement the beauty of this neighborhood. Two, this is a large lot and the landscape project is extensive. Removing all the invasive species on the property along a huge stretch of the beach and professionally installing native species is hugely important. It's great for the local environment, the property abutters, beach erosion, and everyone who uses the beach. Three, the new owners are a close family that have been coming to Chatham to vacation for well over a decade and have fallen in love with it. They want this to be a home where the family will gather for generations, just like quite a few other surrounding homes. We are looking forward to the Ferrises being part of the neighborhood. Four, the house design does not appear to be too large for the neighborhood. From a visual perspective, it doesn't seem to be noticeably taller or spatially larger than the current one. Five, this new home built to modern standards is much less likely than the current neglected one to end up in our backyard in the event of a storm. We encourage you to approve this plan. It improves the neighborhood with regards to beach erosion, removal of invasives, and replacement with native plantings, removing a neglected property, replacing it with a home that complements the charm of the area and enhances views from neighbors' properties, the street, and the water. Sincerely, Daniel Foley and Deborah Foley, 189 Scattery Road. I believe that's the end of the current correspondence. I'll ask if there's anyone on Microsoft or in the audience who would like to speak against this proposal or has a specific question.
I see no one that wishes to speak in opposition or has a question.
All right, seeing none, why don't we have questions from the board? We'll start with Dave Thompson.
Dave Thompson has no questions.
Dave Veach has no questions.
Buck has no questions.
When I compared the previous application to this one, you had some really helpful square footage charts of the house. Can you just confirm for me, because they're not on this submission, on the plans that you submitted, both existing and proposed. Can you just confirm for me the existing and proposed square footage, net and gross?
I don't know if I can do net and gross. We either have one or the other.
So the square footage didn't change from the previous submission. There were no changes to square footage with the revisions.
So we can use the
So
previous plan submission?
Your gross area, we got a little bit better handle on existing gross, but the gross area is 3,000. So here you go. So you're looking at net square footage right here of the proposed house.
So the existing
In
house
the
is
existing house.
2,455 square feet. The proposed house
Right.
is 4,286 square feet. And that's living area, not gross. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah.
Do you have the gross number?
I'd have to get it for you. I don't have that on me right now.
Okay.
Let me work on that a second. If that's critical, I can get that for you.
So the floor area numbers for the structures haven't changed.
So let me just summarize without having to get
Sure.
into a whole thing here. You didn't change anything other than the ridge height.
On the buildings, that's correct.
Are there other changes other than that? You said on the buildings. Are there some other changes that were made? I just want to be aware of anything that
No, I
changed.
think No.
There were no other changes to the architecture with the exception of lowering the ridge
Yeah, no.
and the chimneys.
Okay. This might be, obviously, we got into a discussion last time about the floodplain and the fill and everything. Are you still planning on filling?
What?
Aren't you bringing in fill? I
No,
thought that-
no, we can't. No, we can't. You cannot bring
I
in
didn't think,
fill.
but I thought there was some
I might have made,
discussion.
I might have made a joking reference to the fact that,
I'm not talking about a tremendous amount of fill.
no,
because
I
when
know.
when
But- I know, but just so you know, our building commissioner, who can answer the question better than I, has taken to heart the restrictions in our bylaw regarding no excavation, no dredging, no filling. And so the reality is that, I'll give you an example. We had a house, the property owner wanted to put a patio in. It would have required modifying the grade so the patio would be level. Because of our bylaw, he couldn't modify that grade because it was in the floodplain. So he ended up doing a deck over the, so in other words, we can't change the elevations of the ground by either reducing them or increasing them.
Yeah, I just remember from I thought there was some reference to it, and I think, and that's fine if that's the case. I'm just
Yeah.
confirming it.
Yeah, no, it's,
Because when I'm reading the plan, to be honest, and, on the legend, there's supposed to be some existing spot elevations. I don't see any. So I'm trying to interpolate from the topo that exists to the grades.
Would you put up the site plan, please, Sarah?
As best I can.
There are some spot elevations on here, but expand it, please.
But they're proposed.
Right, and the intent is to show, I see where you're coming from, but every spot elevation that we show as proposed is also
Is
existing.
also existing.
Yeah, we're not changing the grades at all. That was clear from day one of designing this house.
Okay, just want to make sure of that. Right?
Yeah.
Then, as far as the floodplain boundary, does that ever, how often does FEMA look at that and possibly make adjustments to that line? And what's, if they were going to adjust it, what would be the basis for doing that?
They do it, they used to do it on a regular basis. The last one was 2014. They had sent out preliminary maps in 2011, and there was an uproar across the state. So they tabled implementing that, and then Hurricane Sandy hit, and the new numbers were worse than the 2011 numbers. The prior revision to a map in Chatham was 1998, and then I believe 91 was a result of the 87 break. It took FEMA that long to collect the data and adjust the maps. Prior to 91, I couldn't tell you. I think I don't know. It's before my time.
I think it was 87, I think.
So I know 91 and 98 were the two last map revisions based upon the old datum, the really lousy paper maps that had the coastline and the roads had no bearing to reality, and it was very difficult to. But in 2014, the FEMA digitized everything, so the velocity zone line shown on this plan is imported directly from Mass GIS, in that
And
we're.
when was that done? You said, tell me again.
2014 is when,
2014.
yeah. And there's nothing on their website regarding when the next map revision's coming out. I do know that NOAA is in the process of creating a whole new vertical datum for the entire United States. It was supposed to be out this year, probably not going to be out till 2024 or 25. I believe sometime after that, FEMA will probably update their maps to match the new vertical datum that NOAA puts out. So
Because the line doesn't really follow topography.
it doesn't, not, and
I'm trying to
yeah,
wrap my hands
the,
around that.
the velocity zone is strictly by location. So right to the north of this, just north or northwest of the Fogelman House on Kochpinicket is one of the FEMA's transect lines, where they did the analysis from out in the ocean, cut a line into Chatham, and took a look at the topography of the land, and did run their analysis of the flood. Because there are very high revetments there, the wave run-up follows those revetments up to elevation 24. The closest section to this is a section that goes through Allen Point, is what they call it, on this very end of Scattery, where the revetments are.
Yes,
And that's
we
where.
also call it Minister's Point.
Minister's Point, yep. And that elevation, because the revetments are much lower there, the run-up elevation's only 19. And there's no revetment in front of this house. We have the beach, but we're stuck with that 19. And again, it's a calculation based upon the topography of the land and the theoretical run-up of the wave and also the wave energy. And so that's where that's how they come up with the 19. When you get into the A zone, the floodplain, although the map won't exactly follow the contour because of it's actually quite good, the technology the FEMA used in order to acquire the topographic information. But even FEMA says that an on-site survey is required to determine the limits of the A zone. And so in this particular case, if we superimposed the AE14 line from Mass GIS, it would differ sometimes substantially. In this case, I don't know because I didn't look at it, because what holds is what's on the ground, elevation 14 for the A zone, if that makes sense. So,
Meaning the A zone line would be at elevation 14?
yes.
Is that what you're
So,
saying?
yeah, so what I said earlier about the still water elevation plus the wave run-up equals the base flood elevation in the FEMA insurance study of 13.8. FEMA rounds that up to 14. So in theory, any wave run-up along with any wave action as far as heights of wave won't exceed elevation 14. So they presume that the landward extent of the A zone is the contour represented by the A zone number. So we're 14 where we are. Just to the southwest, I think it drops down to 13. Yep. And then further south, I think it's actually 15 where you,
Yeah, right there.
yeah,
Another line.
along Old Wharf Road, so.
So the A zone's in the green and the B zone's
Yeah.
in the
Blue and
Yeah.
B zone.
That doesn't really jive with this, though, does it? Is it?
Well, the A zone on the assessor's map and Mass GIS is based upon aerial survey
I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong spot.
and,
Okay, I got you.
yep.
So, and maybe this is a question for Jay, but in the V zone, pretty tightly restricted what you can and can't do, right?
It is,
Basically.
and like Dave had mentioned, you take the shaded area rather than an elevation for the V zone, and they're out of the V zone with this project.
Yeah,
And he shows that on a detail for the deck.
Yeah, right. So in the A zone, there's nothing in the bylaw really. I mean, there's no real restriction. I mean, is there a restriction there from the town standpoint as to what you can and can't do?
Most of the floodplain work that we see is in the A zone,
Yeah,
not the B
well, I
zone.
would hope, yeah.
And, they have to be 1 foot above base flood for the lowest floor.
Right,
You've got to have
okay.
flood vents in the structure for a FEMA compliant foundation. If it's considered a substantial improvement, a demo rebuild is automatically a substantial improvement. If you replace or repair more than 50% of a foundation, that's also a substantial improvement. And it looks like that's from the town GIS. It's not FEMA map per se, but it looks to match what they have on the
Yeah.
site plan pretty
I was
accurately.
looking at the wrong spot, so that, yeah. That, I don't have any more questions, thanks, Bob.
Actually, we're more restrictive than what the GIS shows.
It appears
The
slightly.
14-foot contour is west of our building corner. So again, it's the on-the-ground survey that determines where the 14-foot contour is.
Okay.
Thank you. I just have one question. My question is about the plantings. It sounds like they're really gonna be helpful, and I guess that young woman.
Don't go too far, Dave.
Thank you. It sounds like the plantings are gonna really be dispositive as to a lot of the issues that we're talking about. And I'm just wondering, how long do they take to be effective? Like, once you plant them, they're gonna, sort of be in shock, right? I don't know that much about gardening, but.
Yeah, well, it's definitely going to take a couple of years for the plantings to get established. So we basically assume that we're going to be providing support for those plants for up to 3 growing seasons before they're fully established and completely on their own. Once root systems get established, we see between 1 and 3 feet of growth per year. So figure 1 year for root systems to get fully established, and then we'll start to see significant growth. And that varies from species to species. We are improving biodiversity on this site, so we're adding a number of different plant species, so they grow at different rates. And the idea of that is to create more complex vertical layering than what's currently existing on the site, so that when we restore the area where we're removing the invasive vegetation, we're able to get a ground cover layer restored where none currently exists. And the whole idea of restoring a native plant community is that those root systems work interdependently, so that they depend upon one another, and they grow together, and so they form a greater mass than each of the plants individually, which is what we experience with the infestation of invasive vegetation that we have.
Like 1 + 1 = 3.
Exactly.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I have no questions. Do I hear a motion?
Yeah, yes, sure. I
Close the hearing?
move to close the hearing and move into deliberations.
And I'll second.
All right. That'll be a roll call vote. Buck?
And Buck approves.
Bill?
Approve?
Dave?
Approve.
And Dave?
And Dave each approves.
And I approve. All right. Do I hear a motion with respect to the application? Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry. We haven't done our deliberation. All right, why don't we start with Dave Veach?
Yeah, so I'm one that, with the original proposal, I felt that was appropriate. And so I think that the new submission, and I think you've done a good job of providing more information with respect to how it fits in. I feel that this structure fits the neighborhood quite well, and I felt that way with the previous proposal, and since they've reduced the height of it and the height of the chimneys and everything, that's even more to the benefit of the neighborhood. And so I don't, in no way do I see this as substantially more detrimental to what's there. I think the arguments that we're getting a FEMA compliant foundation over the existing building, et cetera, is certainly an improvement from the town's perspective and from the neighborhood's perspective. Visually, I think it's a nice-looking house. I think I go out there, I look around, I think it fits in. We've had, the Foleys have agreed, the neighbor to the other side has agreed. I think it certainly meets all of our criteria, and it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. So I will be supporting it.
So I think the last time I did say that I thought the house was beautiful. I certainly still think that. It was a little bit on, in my opinion, a little bit on the large size. And I did at that time suggest that maybe there was a way they could address shrinking it a hair or making it a little less massive. I think it's not the coverage, and it's the cubic feet. And we don't get to talk about cubic feet, so I have to use the word mass. And I look at criteria number 2 and criteria number 5, scale, sighting, and mass, compared to the neighborhood, visual character, including views, vistas, and streetscapes. And I'm looking at streetscapes. And I haven't seen any change to address those issues, and I haven't heard anything to change my mind, so I'm still in the same chair.
I don't have a concern, but I think the house is nice. It seems to fit in the neighborhood fine. I don't have a concern with the massing or the siding of the house or anything associated with it. As much as I would rather see it on a different piece of land, I just get concerned with the fact that you have a piece of property, it's 2 acres, and a tiny portion of it is in buildable upland, and we're allowing a new home to be built within the floodplain. I think it's an improvement in that there are going to be some FEMA compliant things done, and I'm really, really torn about this. I've spent a lot of time looking at it, been out there several times, and today I'm a little bit swayed, I think, by the presentation that's been given about the floodplain. And I'm really on the fence about it, so I'm going to hear everybody else out.
So I agree with Dave Veach, and last time I said perception is reality, so I don't think this is a huge house on a small lot realistically. I understand and I respect my colleagues that have concerns, but on balance, all the changes are so much better for the environment and for the neighborhood, because if this wasn't allowed, then they wouldn't be making all the FEMA changes. And like that neighbor had said, they're concerned that the pieces of their house are going to end up in their backyard. And I agree with that. And so I think that they've hired an amazing team of professionals. And even though Mr. Tortorella, I'm not sure of his name.
Tortorella.
You could tell he took umbrage with the idea of trying to go back to the drawing board, but he did, and he served his client well, and he made some changes, much to his chagrin, and he showed a lot of respect for this board by doing that. And they're back again with a very convincing argument in my mind, and I think they meet all the criteria, and that it will be an actual improvement to the neighborhood for the reasons that were suggested.
All right, Dave Thompson.
Thank you very much. I was in favor last time. I'm in favor this time. It's a wonderful addition to that neighborhood. It's an old neighborhood. You can see there are some old houses there, and there are small homes, but there are some bigger ones too. And let's face it, things have changed from the way houses were built 50 years ago. Just knowing the neighborhood, there's some sizable homes that have little tiny rooms. This is a win-win for the area, for the town, for the, for the neighbors. I support it 100%. I think what Mr. Veach said was perfection, backed up by Ms. Potash. Thank you.
Well, I expressed my view at the prior hearing, in which I said I did not think it was substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And I think that you have improved your presentation with the additional drawings showing the overlay of the existing house on the proposed house, and the significant difference to the extent it exists, as well as the comparisons for height and massing with 189 Scattery Road, 224 Scattery, 36 Whistler, 69 Whistler, 24 Ministers Lane, and 58 Whistler. So I think you have buttressed your position with that, as well as the landscaping improvements, which are substantial. Which I think all help to go to the issue of flood control, if that happens. So I guess we're ready to go with a motion, if we have one.
Yeah, so, and any thoughts with respect to conditions on something like this?
Mr. Riley, do you have any suggestions as to whether you think conditions are appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, as we know, it's a large piece of property, and the construction techniques are really governed by the Conservation Commission order of conditions. There's clearly room on the property for us to pull all construction vehicles off the side. Again, because of the size of the lot, I don't know that it would be appropriate to limit construction, but I don't know how the board feels. I mean, in terms of summertime outside construction.
Well, I think my thought on it is this: the activity vehicles restriction is appropriate and fine. I think this is kind of the end of the road, and if construction activity proceeds in the summer there, as long as the activity is contained on the site and doesn't spill over onto Scattery Landing, there's a minimum number of neighbors who are negatively affected. So I'm inclined to suggest that we not put the summer building restriction. Now, I would put the time restrictions, 8 a.m., no weekends and 8 a.m., but not the no exterior construction. That's my inclination.
Mr. Chair?
And that would be fine for us.
Yes.
I spend a lot of time up there in the summer, and that dogleg on Scattery is loaded with cars. There's a lot of people that go to that beach there, a lot. And so it isn't just the houses in the immediate area. I think, I bet you the beach has 30 to 50 people on there in the summertime. And once again, regardless of what you do, I just want it to be known that there's a lot of people that are sitting at the beach trying to, we'll say, enjoy the view. And I think that you ought to take that into consideration when you do your conditions.
Well, I think, if I might say, in context, I guess the question, aside from vehicles and things, the question is noise and disturbances of that nature. And also in context, and I haven't fine-grained information in this, but I did ask Sarah as an idea of, we impose these summer conditions and we debate about them and sometimes we answer, sometimes not. And I think, I don't have the figures right in front of me, but I think she said that we, over the course of this year, beginning in January, we have conditioned something like 36 or 38 of the permits that we have, special permits we've granted. In that time, some 860 building permits were issued that would involve construction of some kind. We have no control over how work proceeds in those, under any of those. So I think I mean, yes, there's no question that the construction activity is, can be, it's a significant process, and it has effects, on neighboring properties. And I think maybe we've all been through it to some extent. But there's a finite amount of activity that has to take place in order to begin and complete a process. So when we put a time restriction on, we're just delaying part of that. And we perhaps are making it more difficult for the scheduling, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we should be very sparing in general in applying them. And I don't think that in this case, where, yes, sure, there's a beach there and people use the beach, but I can tell you from living in my neighborhood that the noise that landscapers make certainly exceeds that of construction on a regular basis. And that's all over town. So I think we should be very circumspect in applying these things.
I think we should ban leaf blowers myself.
Yeah, I would prefer that, yeah. So.
All right, well then, David, given your motion would be what then?
So my motion would be that we, the approval of the application as submitted with the following conditions: all construction activity and vehicles be contained on the site or at a neighboring property with the permission of the property owner. No work should be permitted on the weekends, and construction activity between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
That's in the summertime.
That's between June 30th and Labor Day, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Upson, I think, is trying to get your attention. Pardon? I thought Buck was trying to get Paul's
I
attention.
wanted to hear what he was saying.
All right, so as I understand it, it's all construction activity and vehicles to be contained on site or at a neighboring property with the permission of the property owner between June 30 and Labor Day. No work would be permitted on weekends, and construction activity would be between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. only.
Great.
Correct.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair, can we have a straw vote first?
All right, why don't we, I think we know where the votes are here. We have two members who are considering it. Why don't we start with Buck? Buck, has this changed your view at all?
No.
Okay. And Bill?
Yeah, they have changed my view.
All right. So do I hear a motion to approve on the basis of those conditions from Dave?
I submit that motion.
Second?
All those in favor, start with Buck.
No.
Bill?
Yes.
Dave Thompson?
Are we voting yes or no for this appeal?
You're voting yes?
I'm voting yes
Yes,
for the
for the
appeal.
appeal, correct.
And Dave Veach votes yes.
And I vote yes. So that's a 4-1 vote.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you giving us a rather lengthy period of time for your science lesson today.
Thank you.
Is there, do we need for the driveway, what's that?
We don't need a separate vote on the driveway.
Oh,
We have a need for a motion to adjourn, but before we do that, just a reminder, our next meeting is December 1, and that will be a 2 PM start. Do I hear a motion?
I move adjournment.
Second, and I approve.
Bill?
Approve?
Approve.
Randy? Dave Thompson?
Dave Thompson, yes.
If each approves.
Rich, and I approve as well. The time is
6 PM.
6 PM.
Not bad.